Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefuehl. Well, if you talk to any of the manufacturers and ask them about the future of cars, they will tell you it is very much SUV shaped. So Volvo could be said to be right at the forefront of that. 2002 saw them bring their first SUV to market, the XC90, and it was a huge runaway success. But they weren't done there. Shortly afterwards, in 2008, we saw the birth of the XC60, and only recently, last year in 2017, it was joined by the XC40. They have all been absolutely fantastic successes. The XC90 is still currently rated the safest car in the world. How is that calculated? Well, no fatalities as yet, fingers crossed. But that doesn't only stop with the XC90. They all have the highest possible crash safety rating, and as with all Volvos throughout history, they innovate new and interesting safety features. So, what's the elephant in the room? Well, clearly that's going to be pricing. None of this technology is brought to you cheaply, but it is still very sought after. So, is it worth that price point? Today, we're going to take all three out for a spin and find out. Come with us, let's go. It's hard to find anyone with anything negative to say about Volvo's lineup of SUVs. And part of the reason for that is the large amount of choice they have on offer. You can get these things with 8 different engines, 5 different trim levels, 2 different types of gear, and 3 different types of power delivery to the wheels. That's an awful lot of choice. There are 8 different engines available on Volvo's lineup of SUVs, and they've given us just a small sample to get a good cross-feeling of what's available. Now this, I think you can probably describe as being Volvo's most workmanlike of their engines. This is a 4-cylinder diesel, it's 2 litres, produces 235 horsepower or 480 Newton meters of torque. Now, that's a nicely sized bit of torque to provide you with the power that you need. I'm wondering if those horsepowers are going to be enough for this size of vehicle, so it's going to be interesting to find out what implication that has, but this does make for a nice compromise between price point and efficiency. So that's a good place to start. But let's say we want to go a little bit crazy and spend a bit more money. Well, let's move to the XC60 and see what we've been provided with there. Wow, well, this is the hybrid engine. This is providing you with a straight 4-cylinder petrol engine, a 2 litre, that's 303 horsepower and 400 Newton meters of torque. But don't forget, we're not all done there, because we have also an electric engine here, and that gives you an extra 87 horsepower to play with. So I think as far as performance is concerned, that's what we're going to be looking at with the drive on this car. But it's also going to be interesting to see what efficiencies we can bring to bear to our driving experience when we add that electric motor into the mix. Now, let's see what they've given us with the XC40. Well, we're all about efficiency and price point here, so the engine should represent that. When we take a look in this bay, what we're looking at is a 3-cylinder petrol. That's a 1.5 litre engine producing 156 horsepower or 265 Newton meters of torque. So this is the lightest of the bunch. It should then also be very fuel efficient. Interesting to me to note, in part of our cost saving with this car, we have no sound deadening on the bonnet itself. But if you press down on this, the engine cover itself is actually soft touch material, and that means that very cleverly a lot of the noise deadening has actually been built into the engine itself. That's a nice feature. I'm very pleased to see, in terms of making cost savings on this car, we haven't skimped on adding gas struts to this bonnet as well. And although that might seem like a very minor detail, trust me, If it's raining at 3 in the morning and you need to have a look in here, it's something you're really going to be happy about. So let's say that price is not your primary requirement, but you really need to know what space that you're getting with this, depending on what you need to put into the back of these things. Well, clearly, if you're going to want to transport 7 people around, it's a no-brainer. You're going to need to go with the XC90. And even with those 3 rows fully up, you still get a very pleasing amount of space back here. What you're looking at is 315 litres of load space, even with all of those 3 rows engaged. And we put one of the seats up just to show you what that means. If you fold that down, you get a very handy 692 litres of load room. Well, I think you can agree that's more than generous. But obviously that comes at a price point. So let's take a look at the slightly smaller, a little bit more town-friendly XC60 and see what that can bring to us. Well, the slight compromise we have right from the get-go is that because this is a hybrid, we need to make a little bit of space for our charging cables. And as you can see, that is not nothing. That does take up a little bit of room. We have a look under the bay here. We can see that there might just be enough room to fit those in underneath, so it shouldn't compromise you too much. In terms of overall space here, we are looking at 505 litres. So in terms of the most accessible standard available space, I would say that this is the car to go with. Why? Well, because you're always going to have that 3rd row, I think, practically in use. There is no 3rd row to worry about here. So this is a great car for everyday use if you do not have to have that 3rd row of passenger seating. Now, the smallest and most cost effective, have they done away with all of that available space in order to hit their price point? Very pleasingly, the answer is no, they have not. This is 460 litres of load room and a very nice practical layout. Look at all that space. For a small car, I really think they've delivered an excellent job of managing to make a good compromise between room and usability. Now, back in 2002 when the XC90 launched, it was a big question as to whether Volvo was going to be able to successfully carry over their iconic styling, but do it in a contemporary and modern way. A lot of people didn't think that would be achievable, but boy were they wrong. Volvo not only managed to make sure that their cars looked incredibly distinctive and kept that fantastically iconic Volvo styling, but also managed to make them feel and look contemporary. Now we can see that very strongly in the latest iteration of the XC90. Look at the boldness of this front. You would think it would be very difficult to know just from glancing at this that it was a Volvo, but when we look slightly higher up, and Thomas shows us here the flanks of this bonnet right from the start, coming down into this nicely angular array and this big bold grille, we can see immediately this is a Volvo. Like many of the other brands, we have a nice integration here featuring this large bold central logo of the sensors, meaning that you don't get any additional clutter when you look at the front of this vehicle. Now, one of the early criticisms of SUVs was that they were potentially deadly to pedestrians. Why? Well, we have this large, bold front design, and the concern is you're going to sweep a pedestrian straight underneath the car. Well, not with Volvo. They were one of the first manufacturers, if not the first, to integrate the crumple zone technology and design and the way that the bonnet interacts in the case of impact to make sure that the pedestrian is carried over the top of the car, and that results in this being one of the safest cars on the road, not just amongst SUVs. What's impressive is the way that they've managed to use that design within the aesthetic appearance as well. It could be made to be looked as if the design had suffered in order to integrate that safety technology into the way this car is built. But look at this, it really hasn't. I really like the angularity of the design, especially as we get lower down here. There's no need to make big, bold chrome statements on this car. Yes, it's big, yes, it's impressive, but it still looks stylish. And that's really quite some achievement for an SUV. This is what has become the classic SUV Volvo car fob design. As you can see, what's special about this is that the buttons have been positioned on the side of the key fob. That means it sits in your pocket very nicely and you're much less likely to press something while you're holding it. Now, let's take a look inside. This is the R design. That makes it the top sporty interior trim. And as you can see, the way that that expresses itself is a lot of carbon fiber styling and also some nice conservative understated interior look and feel. Talking about look and feel, let's get in and take a closer look. Well, right off the bat, before we do that, if Thomas brings the camera down, we can see this R Design logo built into the doorstep itself. And these seats, yes, Thomas, they are leather. Now, other options are available, so obviously we would be quite excited about those, but that doesn't affect the way the seat actually feels and performs. So let's have a sit in and find out what we think about overall comfort for this car. The XC90 is an extremely popular car, and it doesn't take long once you're sitting inside one to see why. I think this is almost the SUV of choice for most people if they can afford to buy one realistically. And you can understand what it is that appeals so much. From the moment that you sit in this car, you're very much impressed with a feeling of how grown up the experience is. There isn't anything on here that feels like it's overblown, overstated, or cheaply made. The materials are all really good quality, they're all nicely put together, and they all just add up to saying to you, you've arrived. This is sophisticated stylishness you would expect from a Swedish product, and it is distinctive. You're not going to sit in here and think to yourself, is it a little like a Mercedes? No, it's not. It very much has its own its own individual styling characteristics. So what that means in terms of what you experience as the driver, certainly in the R Design, is that you're going to be feeling a lot of, I would say, clinical styling. Now, that appeals very much to me. It doesn't necessarily appeal to everyone. And it's important to mention, I think, at this point, that there are always additional bits of money that we can spend in terms of what we experience in the cabin. The entrance price on this particular model is $68,000. And by the time we have all the whistles and bells that this car has been fitted out with, you don't get very much change from 100,000 euros. So really, it ought to be good. So let's start at the top. This is a very interesting and unique integration of the sound system into the car. It's also a very good place to demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about with all these optional extras coming to you at a price. This sound system adds, I think, an extra 3,000 to your experience as a driver. Now, when you turn it on and you listen to it, and we have, you can hear the quality that you're getting, but you can get an awful lot of sound system for 3,000, so you have to have that money available to spend. But I really like the way that it's been integrated into the design of the car so that it says I'm here and I matter, and that money that you spent is of value, rather than just being hidden away and nobody, bar for some obscure logo, understands what you have. If you're going to spend 3,000 in addition to the money you're already throwing down on the car, you're going to want an extremely competent, good sound system. The only problem with that in a car is that, as you may know if you've ever taken the back panel off a door, all of the money's been spent on what the customer can actually see. Behind the scenes, as much money is always saved as possible. So the way that this skin attaches to the door, it's obviously good, but it's not designed with as much attention to detail as the front. What that means is, once you put a powerful stereo system into a car, as anyone who's ever fitted their own will be able to tell you, you're always going to be slightly concerned about vibration. And even in this brand new car, Thomas and I, we had it pumped up yesterday to see what kind of quality it delivered. We have to tell you, it didn't pass the vibration test. Just a little bit, but you should always be aware that if you're going to spend money on a decent sound system, a really good sound system integration into the car, you're also going to need to make sure that the car itself is ready to cope with the power that you're putting into it in pure design terms. Now, I shouldn't really have mentioned it was only a little vibration, but you know, if I'm going to spend 100,000 on a car and 3 extra on the stereo, I'm not going to want to hear any vibrating at all. So coming further down, let's take a look at the inbuilt infotainment system. Now, if you're one of those people who says, oh, I don't care about infotainment, I'm so bored, and just switches off. 1, don't worry, we're going to make this nice and fast. And 2, this is a really important feature of the design of this car. The pluses here are that Volvo have decided to go with this. Instead of what you standardly expect with the landscape view, they've gone with portrait. And what I like about that is it distinguishes itself very much from its competitors, and also from looking as if it just has an iPad integrated into the dashboard. This is very much a signature piece of Volvo design. So it looks unique, it looks really clean, and it doesn't interfere with you having any form of visual interference while you're driving. Now, that's the positive. The not so positive is the way in which you experience the controls as you're driving. Now, obviously, you get more used to everything as you go along with these things, but my goodness, the controls here are comprehensive. That's what you get for trying to switch off the rear wiper while you're doing moderation. I apologize. It's still going. Oh, Thomas. Well, that was a lot of fun. You'll be happy to learn that the windshield wipers have now stopped again. So back to this infotainment system. Let's talk about what that means in terms of how you use this car on a daily basis. Well, the most common features you're likely to want to access are obviously heating and cooling. And while I'm stationary here, let's just turn the car on. So we've got some, there we go. You can see this is preset for 23 degrees. If you know the temperature you want and you're happy to keep things consistent, it doesn't need to bother you at all. But I ask you, are you really going to want to do this while you're driving? That requires an awful lot of attention, and I'm just not sure that there's any way that that's ever going to be able to replace a simple knob in my mind. But obviously you can see why they've done it. It makes for a much cleaner presentation here, and I can't even begin to describe to you just how comprehensive these options are. This car has so many different features you can adjust, but there's no possible way that you're going to want to be getting into that while you're driving. So although this is very impressive and it works very nicely, broadly speaking, I think it's best that you pick exactly what you want and leave it well alone while you're getting on with the actual job of driving this car. Now, talking about that, the actual driver's display is really nicely thought out. We have a head-up display here. It's discreetly built into the dashboard, and that delivers only the most simple information to you in a really easy to digest format. The exact same can be said of the driver's digital display. This is really nicely delivered. It's simple, it's discreet, it doesn't give you any more information than you want, but that said, once you start digging into submenus, you can find options for more or less anything you could want to look at. It really is almost endless, the amount of changes that you can make. Come on. This car is torturing me. It really is endless, the amount of options that you can have to change here with regards to the digital information that you have displayed. But even for an old Luddite like me, and Thomas, I have to say, you can still find a way of making the information presented as simple as you want it. So it only delivers the information you want while you're driving this car. And talking about driving this car, well, that is quite some experience. We'll come on to that in a little bit. Let's just take a quick look slightly further down just to finish off with the styling. Well, again, you can see this carbon fiber inlay. If this isn't your taste, don't worry about it. As I said earlier, there are 5 different design lines, so you can find something in this car that's going to suit you. This, I would say, is my taste. It's subtle, it's conservative, and it's not overblown. And I like the way these individual features are delivered. They look nice and conservative. They just deliver what you want in a really very easy way. And when you're not using them, they look very clean and uncluttered. The same can be said for the controls here. They are stripped down. We don't have 1,000 different knobs to control different things. But look at this drive mode selector. It's nicely placed. I really like the texture on this wheel because it means when I'm not looking at it at all, I absolutely know that I've hit the right thing that I want to look at. To select it, I just push on it and then roll up and down. It really couldn't be simpler. That's great because as I want to change my driving experience, I really don't want to have to take my eyes off the road in order to do it. So 2 thumbs up in terms of limited clutter and keeping my attention where it's supposed to be. I just would really like those heating and cooling knobs back. What do you think, Volvo? Can you help me out? When the XC60 launched in 2008 in a category we would call compact SUVs, it was a real question as to whether or not we were going to be able to carry over all of that styling into a smaller car, but still make it look distinct. Well, that is obviously the gold standard of design challenge. And as Thomas pointed out to me earlier, unless you really pay attention, when you see one of these in the rearview mirror of your car, it's really difficult to distinguish easily what it is that's sitting behind you. Well, for my money, this is my favorite aesthetically of the three designs. It's carried over that big, bold styling of the XC90, but it adds a little flair all for itself. There's additional angularity in this design and a slightly more compact form. It means that the car still looks aggressive and sporty on the road, but just a little bit more stylish for my taste. What do you think? Now let's take a look at the XC60. Well, as you can see, this key is a very similar design to the 90. It's only the fabric on the outer surface that lets you know it's different. Well, as I said, the first impression that I get when I sit in this car is one of complete uniqueness. I really like these individual features. Okay, as I said, they might not be to everybody's taste, but they really do make the car look and feel special and different. This is a very recognizable integration of the infotainment system, so I won't bore you by going into details again. It's exactly the same system, it works the same way. And like the other system, come on Volvo, piano black everywhere, fingerprint central, but it's not overly done, so that's okay. Now, the experience of using this is exactly the same. The sound system, again, is a lot of additional money. Now, this car, I think, has an entrance price of around €72,000, and once you put in all the whistles and bells, 92.5. Ouch. So you're going to want an awful lot of car for that money. Well, Thomas and I argued about this a little bit yesterday, but in my opinion, this is the best sound system I've ever heard in a car. I know, shocking, right? Well, okay, I mean barring custom built ones. The sound is bright, it's clear, the bass is wonderful, beautifully delivered, and it really does add an extraordinary feeling of quality to your ability to enjoy driving around in this car. So I know it's eye-watering having to spend an extra $3,000 on your sound system, but if you're going to lay down this kind of cash for this kind of car, I'd say, you know what, at least test it before you dismiss it out of hand. It really is something special. And I don't say that about sound systems in cars very often. Now, as Thomas would be very enthusiastic to point out, we also have special acoustic glass. And I think, if I remember correctly, Thomas, was that an extra $1,500 for the front too? Thomas said $750 yesterday, but I think that may have been per door.
Take a look.
We can take a look.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, we'll take a look now live. Let's go crazy. Even though my German is excellent, Thomas is going to take a quick look and tell me.
Yeah, I've got all of my glasses on, so I can see it's really sharp. Look at the acoustic glass.
Okay. Yes, it's in German, Thomas.
Yeah, how much?
Well, how would I know which one acoustic glass was in German?
Give it to me, please.
Okay, here we go. Teamwork. We can make this happen.
Acoustic glass, 990 euros.
Ah, we're going to have to split the difference. We were both halfway right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's the same thing. Everything you're going to want on one of these is going to cost you more money. And I haven't had the experience, but I'm pretty certain if you go to a Volvo dealership, they're going to work very hard to make you take as many of those things as possible. Please try out everything. Make sure you're getting the car that you want. I always say that when you're buying a car at price point, it's important to consider what the overall experience for you as owner will be, because you're likely going to be paying for it a few years after you bought it. So make sure you have the features you want when you get the car. Now, we haven't driven this sound system without that acoustic glass, so I honestly couldn't tell you if that makes any difference in the world. But what I can tell you is while you're driving the car, the road noise is superb. So again, how much of a difference it makes, I don't know, but please give it a try and see what you think. Now, back to the styling of the interior of this car. Well, we've got a bit of a mixed bag here. As I said, I really like the individuality and I think that's great, but what's strange is this is not a cheap car. So I can't help but ask myself why some of the finishing just doesn't quite go with the car. If you've watched Thomas's review, you will know that he has not been massively impressed by these steering wheels, and I understand why. They are very nice to use while driving, but the finish of them just doesn't resonate quite with the quality that you get somewhere else. I have no idea why it is we've gone with this shiny finish on the driver's controls. They are very nice to use while driving, but to look at, well, maybe it's just my taste, but I would have gone with something a little bit different. let's take a look at the central console. Now on this model, we have a crystal gear knob. That is to help us select the modes on this, the most expensive of the engines. This has not only the engine, but also an electric engine to assist. And that's why when we look slightly further down here, we can see that we have an extra drive mode, this B down here, and that is for recuperative driving. Obviously that does affect the feeling of the drive, but you would get used to it in no time at all. If you're used to driving cars with regenerative capacity, you'll know what I mean. When you put it in neutral, ordinarily the car would coast. You feel a little bit of lag as the car is pulling back from that inertia in order to recharge the batteries. It really isn't bothersome at all. You get used to it very quickly. But for pure driving pleasure, you can still obviously just select the standard drive mode. Here we have a crystal gear knob. And I don't know if you noticed in our X5 review, this is not unique now to Volvo. BMW have also produced a Swarovski crystal one. So I have to tell you, I'm more than a bit intrigued to know who came up with this idea first. But it feels nice in the hand when you touch it. A little bit of cool from the crystal, and it resonates the quality of the rest of the cabin. Volvo have used a special finish on this piano black. So unlike almost every other car I have tested, which is covered in this stuff, look at this. It doesn't act as a fingerprint magnet. I am really pushing my thumb down on this and I can't even make it show that I've left a fingerprint. That's nice. I'm not a huge fan of piano black overall, but if you're going to use it, it really does speak to the design quality that's throughout this car, that they've actually found a material that doesn't look terrible after you've used it. Now further back, we have a nice tactile start-stop function for the engine. This drive mode wheel that we know from the XC90 is just as nice to use in this car, and the central console overall works in a very familiar fashion. 2017 and the birth of the XC40. Now, a subcompact SUV that seems from a design point of view like a high-risk game. Why? Well, we know that SUVs have to be tall, they have to be bold, but we know that their most common problem was body roll in design terms. So how do we put all of that into a really small package? It's something that all of the manufacturers have to address because, as we know, this is the future of the car market. How does that impact on Volvo right now? Well, I can tell you, these three cars, their lineup of SUVs, make up over 50% of their global sales currently. So clearly they're doing something right. Well, when we look at this one, I think the most surprising thing in visual design terms is that we maintain the height of the previous two. You would absolutely think that's to be impossible. Look at the way that this front presents. This car is much smaller, much more compact than the other two, but in visual terms, referencing from the front, it has the same bold characteristics. I like that it's been brought down to look a little bit more affordable. I think that's the way of framing it. Look at this, we have a plastic grille and we very much have what I would call an urban styling. This car looks as if it's going to be very happy driving around town, picking up kids and doing the shopping with. But don't forget, it's a Volvo, and that means they still want you to know it can go off-road as well. So in styling terms, I think Volvo have done something that's almost impossible. They've managed to keep styling consistency across their brand, even though they're changing the usability and functionality of these three cars quite radically with the different platforms. So now we come down to the XC40, and here I have to be honest, it does feel as if Volvo are trying to make sure that you know this is the cheapest of their SUVs. So we have a plastic key, plastic buttons, and it really looks similar but doesn't resonate the same feeling of quality in the hand. I guess that's what you'd expect. Now here we have the momentum trim. I think that makes us 3 for 3, doesn't it, Thomas? Okay, let's do that again. Here we are. Here we have the momentum trim, and this, it will not surprise you to learn, is by far the cheapest of the three cars that we are showing you today. This has an entry-level price of just, I say just, it's still not nothing, €34,000. Now, as we have it equipped here, Obviously a lot of additional bells and whistles. This comes in at just over 48,000. Ouch, that is a lot of cash, but it is still a lot less than its two bigger brothers. So what are we sacrificing in terms of interior finish? Let's take a closer look and find out. I think the key is a fair introduction to this car. Right from the second you climb in, you are very well aware that you are sitting in, I think economy might be an unfair word, the more cost-efficient version of Volvo's SUVs. That's not to trade anything off in terms of what the car delivers though. Don't forget, this has still won multiple awards as well, and all of the technology that has been baked into the bigger two carries through to this one as well. So, come on, if you're interested in having a Volvo SUV experience, but you need to price to make sure that you can afford what you're doing, you're still going to get an awful lot of that Volvo SUV experience in this car. So I certainly don't want this to sound as if I'm being too negative about the experience. But if you're going to spend less money on the interior fit, then less is what you are going to get. So let's take a look at this styling. Well, right from the get-go, the materials feel and look a lot more basic. When we look at these design trim levels coming through the car, obviously they are going to feel a little bit more in keeping with price point. The infotainment system is still recognizable, so we're not going to spend too much time feeling about that. And the steering wheel experience, well, although it's carried through from its bigger brothers, we've gone with a matte finish here. I can't help but think that although that feels a little bit more ergonomically satisfying to use, it might have been nice to have maybe seen some metal here on the higher trim levels. Now this car features the 6-speed manual, that's to help keep the price down, rather than the automatic. But it's a very nicely built gearbox. We'll come onto that when we talk about the driving, and it's very nice and painless to use. Now, what this car really resonates in terms of visual and aesthetic experience on the interior is more or less exactly what you'd expect. The quality still looks and feels good, but it's everything done a little bit more cheaply. Now, depending on your budget, that's either going to be a great thing because it's finally going to mean you can afford to get into the Volvo SUV business, or it's going to be a compromise too far. I have to say, as this is a premium product, I am leaning definitely more towards the larger end of things because I want to feel that that money has gone somewhere where it resonates. This is delivering very much a Volvo experience in a cheaper format and package. But you know what? I think if it drives as well as the other two do, I just don't think I'm going to care that much. But there is only one way to find out, and I think, Thomas, it's time that we did. Let's start where it all began with the XC90, the first and many would argue still the best. Well, in 2002 when Volvo came out with the XC, a lot of people felt that Volvo had a reputation for quality build and value, but it wasn't necessarily always seen as a premium brand. The XC90 changed all of that. Even in its early first edition, it was immediately well received. And throughout its various changes through the years, it's only become more and more popular and helped push Volvo into that upper echelon. Now, as I said earlier, this car is available with a choice of 8 different engines, so you're certain to be able to find what you're looking for. We have one of the less powerful diesels today, and I'm very interested to see how much that will come into play. This car weighs 2.2 tons, and to put that into perspective, that is the same unloaded weight as the XC60 with a hybrid engine and all of those additional batteries. So, okay, we have over 400 Newton meters of torque, we have plenty of heft in this car, and we have a 0 to 100 predicted time of 7.8 seconds. Well, that's not too shabby either. Top speed of 220 kilometers per hour. But do we have the power where we need it in this car at the time? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the drive, how it feels, and whether this is the engine you're going to want to go with if you want to buy one of these cars. Let's go. Even with the available weight on board, it's really nice to be able to see that you can still push crisply off the mark with this engine. Being a diesel, you are always going to experience a little bit of turbo lag, more on that later, especially when you're driving at slightly higher speeds. We'll find a little bit of road in a moment just to show you how that impacts on the drive. The drive itself, I think you could only fairly describe as sublime. The air suspension has been so well tested and utilized within this car that for large sections of the drive, irrespective of the drive mode that you're in, it really feels a lot more like floating along the road than it actually does like driving, even in some really appalling conditions. But of course, that depends on what you like when you're driving. And I have to say, in my experience of driving this car, I still would have liked a little bit more responsive feedback from the road. Even when you have it in dynamic or sportier driving modes, you still feel that you're lacking a little bit of the feedback from the road that I personally would like. But that's taste, and I think a lot of people are going to be very, very happy with the comfort that this air suspension provides. And don't forget, it is always optional, so you don't have to have it if you don't want it. Now, talking about those driving styles, well, selecting them is actually very straightforward. Because of this nice tactile driving mode selector, we really don't have to look at it very much at all, and we can just pick through our driving modes, whatever suits the environment we're going through. The XC90 is a very spacious car, but Volvo have managed to pull off a bit of a trick. It doesn't drive like the size that it actually is. It's much more nimble and responsive than you would expect. We have had the opportunity to take this on what I would describe as mild off-road, but there is acres more experience of this car doing exactly that to demonstrate that it is more than capable if you want to use it in any space. Part of the popularity of this vehicle clearly is the fact that you can drive 7 people round in it and still have enough room for plenty of luggage in the back. Now, all of that utility clearly comes at a price, and this is not a cheap car. So the first thing you're going to need to ask yourself is, can I really justify spending that kind of cash on one vehicle? Well, what I can tell you is if you've made the decision that that's okay and you can justify it, you are going to be happy with your purchase. There literally isn't anything here to dislike. The only complaint that I think you could reasonably have with this car is that there just isn't a lot of change left out of €100,000, which is quite some budget for buying one. But the amount of choice that you have means that whatever your particular driving style is, you will be able to find something that suits you. For me, with this engine, well, I like the economy. If all I'm ever doing is driving around town, I am completely happy with that. But as we'll show you in a little bit, once you get out on the open road, if you have a need to overtake anything, well, that's where the power band is going to come in a little bit short. A combination between the turbo lag and the smaller engine and the sheer weight of this car means you just don't get the acceleration you'd like. I'm on this road now currently driving at 60 kilometers per hour. We have a speed limit of 100. So let's see what happens when I literally put my foot down flat to the floor. Turbo lag, power delivery, and 100. So once the power kicks in, it's not so bad. After all, do you really need to get past something that urgently in a car of this size? Probably not. But it is something you're going to have to live with. If you are a driver who's very enthusiastic about getting those crisp torque responses from your car and all the information back viscerally as you drive, I don't think this is going to be the right package for you. But there are a lot of engines, and I'm certain you're going to be able to find one that will give you exactly what you're looking for. Let's have a quick talk now about driving position and comfort. Well, the nice thing about larger vehicles is that you have the space to give the driver everything that he or she wants for comfort and pleasure while driving. It's not going to come as a shock to you to learn that the seating position in this car is excellent. What is going to come as a little bit of a shock to you is how the center of gravity is managed. Volvo's intelligent software means that you aren't swaying all over the road, and when you hit corners with a little bit more power, you're pleasantly surprised by how little rollover this vehicle actually has. Steering is crisp and responsive, brakes are excellent, and I'm a big fan of this automatic gearbox. It really does make driving the car a complete pleasure, and you just don't have to think about switching between gears as you drive throughout town. You certainly don't hear it, and it doesn't bother you in any way, shape or form. Overall, it's a complete pleasure. So I'm not in love with this infotainment system. I may mention that a little bit more later on, but Overall, what I really care about when I'm driving a car is that my focus is kept where it needs to be, and that is on the road. This head-up display works excellently. It provides a very limited amount of information in a very easy to digest manner, so you make sure you know what you need to know while you're driving. Thomas, how is it as a passenger?
Very comfortable, very silent inside, and you've got a really great overview over the car. Yeah, I like it.
Thank you. I think you mentioned something very important there. The cabin noise is excellent. And what is good to report is on these standard road tyres, even when you get into slightly rougher environments, you are still not going to find your peace and quiet being disturbed. Find out how its smaller brother, the XC60, gets on. Well, the first thing to note here is that, of course, we have two different power sources, and that means when you start the car up, it's going to start in pure electric. And for the uninitiated, that can be a little bit of a surprise, because you switch it on, and of course you're expecting that nice throaty noise of an engine firing up, and there is literally nothing. Obviously, you're in electric power to start off. Now, you'll remember me mentioning that we have two different driving modes to select from here, either D, standard drive, or B, which is recuperative driving. So we're going to start off in standard D just to see how we get on. Now, this delivers a much faster driving experience than the diesel that we've just taken out. We have a 0 to 100 kilometers time in this car of something just a little around about 5.5 seconds. So that means when you put your foot down in this thing, it moves. Now, because we're in Austria, we have to be nice and careful with our driving. Of course, you have to be nice and careful everywhere, especially though in Austria. So, things to note immediately as being different from the XC90. Well, of course, this is a smaller car, and because of this, it feels a lot more responsive and immediate. We were very impressed with the responsiveness of the XC90 given its size, but obviously there's only so much you can achieve with a car that has that size and that weight. This car, the XC60, feels nimble, light, and very, very adept at handling these roads. Now, oftentimes when you have an electric motor as well as a petrol or diesel, it's really the big question as to how they combine that power to create an output that is not going to bother or in any way impact on the drive of the car. Well, we have all-wheel drive here. That gives us very good control when we're off and out around the bends, around the hills. But throughout town, the switching is actually pretty effortless indeed. We have dials that tell us the state of the battery and what the charge is like, and they let us know what our potential electric range is. But I have to tell you, if nobody explains to you that this is an electric motor as well as a standard one, you are certainly not going to be able to notice. It performs absolutely effortlessly. Now, this is not a cheap car, and because of that, I would expect every element of this driving experience to be poised, precise, effortless, nice. The challenge with an SUV is always, can you deliver the comfort on-road that you expect to be able to achieve off-road with all of those design features that were necessary to give it the performance that you're looking for there? In the case of the XC60, I can absolutely tell you the answer is yes, and in spades. This isn't a cheap car, so I don't expect anything less, to be completely honest with you. But the Volvo XC60 absolutely delivers. It just puts a smile on your face and keeps you smiling. From the moment that you pull away and right throughout the drive, it's just so easy. But what's really nice about this car is that you feel that you have something of a caged tiger waiting to come out. It doesn't bother you when you're driving through town. You can potter about here and there, and it's really pretty straightforward. But you know, when you want that power, when you want to get the most out of the driving experience in this car, you can put your foot down and wow, it really delights. For a car of this size and this style, there is stacks of drivability to it. Now, driving experience overall, what would you expect? A fantastic position on the road, great all-round visibility. Volvo obviously always paying that little extra attention to driver safety and comfort. That means I'm not bothered by things like the B-pillar. It's very nicely proportioned and positioned. My rear view is excellent, especially with this being an SUV. And my total driver's experience is superb. Steering is crisp and responsive, the brakes are excellent, the automatic gearbox is fantastic. They've had a lot of time to get this right, and they really have nailed it. I would challenge anyone to drive this car and tell me that they were disappointed in the way in which it handled. Okay, you might be less than satisfied with the price tag, but once you've learned to live with that, you are going to be very happy with what you get for your money. Everything resonates quality here. The road noise is really nicely deadened and the drive experience is very comfortable. If I have one criticism, and it would be a very personal one to me, I would say it sits with the air suspension. There's a little bit too much comfort for me, if anything. Yes, we have the driving modes, and if I push down and select and I say, well, really what I want to do is get as much feedback as I can from the suspension, I've selected Power Sporty Driving now. Well, immediately the steering is a little bit more responsive, the brakes are a little bit more immediate, and even though the air suspension has been tightened up a little bit, it's still air suspension. That means for me, the number one thing it delivers is comfort. And really what I want is as much feedback from the road as possible, especially to enjoy a dynamic driving style and making the most of all the power I have available. It might not be the fairest criticism. After all, it is absolutely extraordinary the level of comfort that you can achieve now with air suspension, and you really will appreciate that when you put hundreds of miles on this car, as I'm sure you will. But when you want to get out into those country roads and you really want every single bit of feedback the car has to offer you, it's just lacking a little bit of grit for me. But as I say, that's maybe just my personal opinion. Our original considerations about the way that the steering wheel interacts with the drive and these controls here, well, you simply don't care about them once you start moving, I'm happy to say. And as far as your ability to access the heating and cooling controls through the system here, well, I think that would get to be fairly intuitive after you get used to it. I'm still going to prefer the dials, always, that's just me, but they're not badly positioned within the unit, so I know my control is bottom left. I don't have to look at it. I can push straight on it. I don't know if the camera can catch this here, and I can just happily slide up and down to my heart's content without worrying about it too much. It might take me a while to get the hang of it, but I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. Well, if you're considering, should I go with the manual gearbox or should I look at the automatic? I have to say, as a huge fan of manuals, in this car and for this setup, I'm going to have to go with the automatic. It really is a very nicely designed piece of kit. And when a car does a lot of thinking for you, as long as it makes the right decisions, you're always going to be happy that it did. And in this car, the automatic gearbox just makes everything so effortless. I know when I punch down, I'm going to have that extra power that I'm looking for. And in the meantime, I'm just coasting along without a care in the world. Head-up display is very much appreciated in this car as well. I make sure that I'm absolutely staying within the speed limit. That's the information I want more than anything else, because as you can imagine, with this kind of comfort and power, going beyond the speed limit is really a very simple thing. So that just gives me the information I need in a very straightforward manner. I'd say that's about it for now, really. I can't honestly find anything negative to say about the driving experience of this car, but that's on very straightforward, comfortable roads. I think Thomas and I need to take this up to some hills to find out exactly what it can do. Before we get into those mountain roads though, let's take a look at this recuperative driving. Well, at the moment I started out in D, but don't forget, in order to take full advantage of the claimed efficiency of this engine, which I have to tell you, is suggested to be somewhere at around about 3.5 to 4 litres. I think that might be overly ambitious. But of course, if we want to get close to that, we have to make sure that we're using recuperative driving. So in D, it's fun, it's refined, it's powerful, nothing unexpected whatsoever. Flip down into B, and you notice we get that immediate power draw. Now obviously that's because the car is doing everything within its power to make sure it reclaims as much of that use of fossil fuel energy and converting it into electric energy as it possibly can. In the dashboard, we have a very nice display right next to the petrol fuel gauge that tells us how the battery charge is going. And from our experience of having driven this car already, we've noticed that you do have to drive a long time in order to recharge that battery. I think we put quite a lot of miles on it yesterday and we never managed to take it over halfway full, which, given that we started it on empty, is not so bad. If you're driving it around all day, I think it'll fill up in no time at all. But obviously, in order to get the best of the efficiency on offer, you are going to want to keep it in this mode as much as possible. So what does that mean for the driving? Well, when you're on open roads like this, it really doesn't make any difference at all. And if you've ever driven a recuperative vehicle before, you'll know that the most significant change you have is when you are braking. Now, that's actually quite a pleasing thing over time when you get used to it, because what it means is you're putting a lot less wear and tear on your brakes. As long as you know where you are and you know where you're driving, you need to do a lot less braking because the car actually does it for you, and that feels nice. However, that said, when you're driving somewhere you're less familiar with, it can be a little bit jarring because you expect the car to behave in a certain way, and of course it is a different style of driving. But you do get used to that fairly quickly. I'd be really interested to hear what your experience has been with recuperative braking yourself in different types of car. One thing that you do notice that is slightly bothersome about the drive in this car is that, unlike what you're used to experiencing from a regular automatic gearbox, every single change you wish to make through this gearbox is a step change. So when you stop and you want to get to reverse or drive or recharging, you have to touch the knob a few times. It just takes a little bit of getting used to, and it's just a little bit bothersome, but it's not the end of the world. But let's drive in hybrid. That is described under the submenu as being for everyday use. Now, if you can hear, the engine note has changed, and that tells us that we're not any longer in performance mode. But on this kind of road surface and at this kind of speed, this is absolutely fine. I really couldn't say enough about the comfort delivered by this air suspension. If you could see this road, it is rutted, it is potted, it looks like it hasn't been resurfaced for maybe 20 years, although that could just be the Alpine winters, and I don't feel it at all. The car is assured, it's comfortable, it's confident, it knows exactly what it's doing, and I feel completely relaxed. Now we've come into a slightly wooded area, and the surface here is even less solid. So I do have an off-road mode to put the car into, but to be honest, I'm having such a comfortable, easy time of this, I just don't feel that's necessary. Given that this car is so high up off the road, you might think that when you put a little power into turning around a bend, you'd experience a lot of rollover. Well, pleasingly, you don't. Now there's another car coming just down the track, so we're going to make a bit of room and make sure they can get past us. And this car, at 2.2 tons, drives like a car maybe only 2/3 of its weight. It's really nicely balanced, and because we have all of that power at our disposal, we really don't have to suffer any negative consequence. Now, I'm not sure if this road is going to widen out a little bit and allow us to show you some speed, but what I can certainly tell you is that you don't notice any deficit with the handling because of that additional weight. So, if this looks like everyday use to you, Thomas is warning me we have a sign saying we're all done going up this road. If this looks like everyday driving to you, and you live somewhere in the mountains, then I have to tell you, you're never even going to need to find out how the off-road performs. But of course, it wouldn't be a proper test for us unless we gave it a try. So what do you think, Thomas? Can we find something a little bit more challenging?
No.
So we found a nice little bit of off-road to take you on a drive down, and it's actually pretty beautiful, as you'd imagine, up here in the Alps. Now, using the car in everyday use, what we do here is a slight whine from the electric motor, but you don't need to worry about that, because every time you hear that noise, that's just you saving money. So it's all good. Now, to put it in off-road, I'm going to click on this wheel and I'm going to go down to off-road. So what happens when I do that? Well, the driving profile of the car changes, and that allows me to feel that I have a lot more control. Obviously, that means I'm experiencing more power at those lower revs, and the car is intelligently evaluating what the situation that I'm driving in is. Now, this isn't exactly extreme off-road, but we have no idea what's coming up ahead of us, so it might get a little bit more extreme as we go along. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah. That'd be nice, yeah. But look, take a look. Oh.
Thomas is justifiably concerned about what we might be running into here. But I think, honestly, in the life cycle of most owners, this is about as off-road as you're likely to be going. So we just want to know how the car performs when it does get onto those uneven surfaces. Well, once again, air suspension. It's fantastic. If you are taking your car into an off-road environment and you've never driven an air suspension before, you will be delighted. It is so comfortable. And if where you live there are a lot of roads that aren't finished off, you are really going to enjoy what this delivers to your driving experience. In terms of the impact that it has within the driving profile, well, I just feel like I'm a lot more poised. The steering's a lot more precise now, and the power delivery is as well. So I think we're going to actually have a little bit of space to get up here. Oh, we've been denied again. We have found an awful lot of closed gates while we've been driving throughout the Alps so far. But don't worry, this does give us an opportunity to show you something else. Now, this does happen quite a lot when you are taking excursions off-road, and that is that you find yourself stuck the wrong way down a very narrow track and you have to go backwards. So let's take this opportunity to look and see how this car treats us when we tell it we want to go backwards. Well, as I said, and you saw just then, I have to give it 2 nudges to put it in reverse. You get used to that. But I think the camera might pick up here the display that we get. It's very, very user-friendly. Like all camera systems, it does take just a little bit of getting used to. That is understanding to be able to distinguish between what the camera is showing you here and what is actually outside of the car. Now, I always say to people, make sure you rely first on your own eyes and secondarily as this for a backup system. But it provides you with a very good all-round visibility of the car, and it makes sure that you understand exactly what you're driving over. And that's incredibly helpful when you're driving off-road. Why? Well, that massive pothole that could break your axle that you drove so very carefully round when you were going forwards is all too often something you don't notice when you're driving backwards. So those cameras really do allow you to cover your blind spots and make sure if there are any nasty surprises in the road, hopefully you get a warning before you find out about them by driving over the top of them. Well, I think this is about as large of a mountain road as we're going to successfully manage to find for the time being. We have managed to drive for quite a long time around here without finding something that was quite what we were looking for, but that's okay. This will afford us more than enough in the way of bends and turns to have a look at the handling of this car. Well, I've put it into power. That delivers the best driving experience I can have out of this car, and I think that's enough for you to see, even at these speeds, which are not fast, quite what a great job they've done with this weight distribution, so I'm not rolling all over the road when I give it a little bit of power. Coming around a bend, let's have a look at that. There we go. See? Really nice there. We have traction delivered to us and very little in the way of body roll. That gives me the confidence to really enjoy this driving experience. It's impossible physically to ignore the fact that this car is 2.2 tons in weight. So you have to remember that when you're driving around. You're not going to be able to cheat physics out of the way in which it wants to behave. And you're going to need to drive accordingly. But given what we have to work with, it's absolutely extraordinary how much poise and finesse there is in this drive. You would really expect an awful lot more lateral movement as you put power into these bends. But you don't get it. What you get is a precise and controlled drive. And that really does make for an enjoyable experience of being up in these hills. Well, last but by no means least, it's finally time to take the XC40 out to see what it can deliver in the Alps. Well, the first thing to mention is that we do have a 3-cylinder engine, and that means if you stand outside of this car and listen to it running, you could be mistaken for thinking it's actually a diesel. It's not. That's just a quirk of a 3-cylinder. Well, given that it only has 3 cylinders to play with, does it produce enough power to make it usable? Well, pleasingly, it still delivers a 0 to 100 kilometers per hour time of under 10 seconds. And how does that look practically? Well, that power is being delivered to us via a 6-speed manual gearbox. And I have to tell you, it's not bad at all. There's a lot more power than you'd expect from a small car like this. And the first thing that you notice when you actually sit in this car and start to drive it is just how pleasantly that power is delivered to you. The steering is tight and responsive, and yes, I understand that the last word in luxury is air suspension, and of course we experience that in the XC60 and the XC90. I've got to tell you, I'm more than a little bit pleased to get back my regular suspension. Now, before we talk a little bit more about that, this tunnel does afford us an opportunity to talk about one of the compromises we have with the XC40. I'm sure you're picking up on that. The noise suppression within the cabin is not fantastic. We don't have the largest tyres in the world, so we should be experiencing relatively low levels of cabin noise. Now, pleasingly, it doesn't actually change once you start getting faster, so it's not that it's a problem. It's just that it is significantly noticeable after you've experienced the ride in the larger 2 vehicles. It's just worth mentioning. But honestly, I think you're going to be enjoying the drive so much, you really won't notice it. It's absolutely fantastic to see how much fun they've packed into this car. Once you see the interior, you are inclined to think, well, surely it's just going to be a string of compromises in terms of how this vehicle handles. But you know what? It really isn't. Everything they know about making these cars drive well carries through into the smaller one. It's absolutely superb. Now, I was a little bit worried when I looked at the exterior of this car and saw how high it was by comparison to its bigger brothers, that it might suffer a little bit too much from body roll once you start getting onto those curvy roads. Well, you know what? It unquestionably does have that body roll you'd expect, but absolutely no more. It still delivers your driving experience in a really pleasant, straightforward and easy way. Well, we've had the opportunity to drive it around some fairly unchallenging, straightforward roads, and I think that's enough to tell us how it drives around town. But what I really want to see with this car is how it handles once you get it up into the mountains on those lovely twisty roads. Are we going to pay a big price for this greater height and that shorter wheelbase? Let's find out. Well, now we've come to a nice mountainous area so we can really get a sense of quite how the XC40 handles. I have to tell you, anyone who's ever been to Austria will have made a good point of mentioning to you, if there's one thing you need to know about being here, it's that the police are extremely serious about the speed limits on these roads. So you do have to be a little bit careful. Now, like its bigger brothers, we also have driving modes available for us in this car. But unlike its bigger brothers, those are not on a nice tactile wheel right in the middle of the console. We have to reach over to the side to get what we're looking for. Now, obviously, we're going to want to put this car in dynamic to see exactly what sort of a change that makes to the driving experience. And although we're not going to go crazy, we are going to have a look and see what the handling does. Now, As I said earlier, we are expecting a little bit of body roll on these corners, and we are going to get that. But hopefully we should have enough of a balance. The first thing I'm going to want to point out to you is how nicely this power is delivered through the gearbox. I often think that you tell a lot about gearbox once you put it up into the hills and you can really see how it delivers at different rev points. And I think we may have taken a wrong turn. It's often the case with the new cars when we take them out for review that the compasses haven't quite been calibrated fully. And what that means is that using the sat-nav can sometimes be a little bit of a hit or miss affair. So we've gone a little bit past our turn there. It does, however, afford us an opportunity just to have a look at some of the scenery that we're driving through. I don't know, Thomas, it looks a lot like Cambridge, where I come from. I think Dortmund too, yes?
Yes, Dortmund. Yeah, very high mountains, really.
Similar, yes. This is why it's called an alpine scenery, because alpine made famous by Dortmund and also by Cambridge, I think.
Yeah.
Now we learned earlier today that this is one of the most famous mountain biking areas in the whole world. And I'm not sure if we can pick up on the camera just there some of the ski areas, but all of these are running right throughout the summer because they provide amazing downhill opportunities for mountain biking. So Thomas is a very enthusiastic mountain biker, not so much this one, but more the other one. And I think he might be a little bit jealous that we got to come here and experience this. But I think I prefer to experience it while driving in a car. How about you? One of the most important features about alpine driving is having the additional visibility that you want. As much fun as it is, and it is a lot of fun, whipping around these mountain roads in a sports car, it can be very dangerous because you can't see what's coming around the corners. With this increased ride height that we have in the XC40, you get an awful lot of advance warning of what's going on these twisty, windy roads. That means you can use a little bit more power, and that means you can get a much better sense of exactly how this car is handling. I have nothing but good things to report about that. It's just superb to see how the package has been put together between the compromise over the larger ride height in the smaller vehicle and the way the power is delivered. The traction control is superb, the gears are a joy to use, and it's actually remarkably comfortable. You might think that changing down from the air suspension to the regular would mean a significant difference in ride comfort, but it actually doesn't. The only thing it does result in is a much more responsive feeling drive and much more feedback coming to you as the driver. Now, the only thing that is a little bit of a disappointment is that significant increase in road noise, and you might not experience that every day so much, but it is noticeable after you trade down from the larger two cars. But I don't think you're going to be too bothered about that. I think you'll be too busy smiling, enjoying the drive. Well, now our road surface has changed significantly. For the top part of our ascent here, to get right up to the top of the mountain, we are on gravel roads. So now we have the opportunity to see quite what a difference those drive modes can make. I'm still in dynamic at the moment, but if I push the selector, I can change to off-road. Now, as I'm sure you'll be aware, in a smaller car we don't have as many of the driving characteristics that will change over when we make those changes with our driving style. But we should be able to feel in the drive the car responding differently to the road surface. And immediately I feel more sure-footed on this loose gravel. If I put a bit of power in, I can immediately sense that I have more surety on the road surface, and that's nice. Of course, it's not a true off-road experience, and I'm keen to point out this car is a front-wheel drive. Have it in an all-wheel drive version. It's still a nice feature to have, and I would suggest to you that at any time you want to take your car off the paved road in an experience exactly like this, you're driving up to get to a nice hill location, or more commonly, the weather turns horrible in the middle of winter and you have to drive through a little bit of, well, shall we say, for normal town driving, extreme terrain. It's just a very nice feature to have at your fingertips to be able to have that extra reassurance that the car is going to pay a bit more attention to the stability and keep the power in the range that you want it to be at. So, it's not the biggest change in the world, but it definitely does make a bit of difference. And it just gives me the extra bit of confidence that I like. Getting to film in the Austrian Alps usually means that we have beautiful peace and quiet and ample opportunity to make as much footage as possible. While we know how concerned Thomas always is for animals' welfare, and earlier on, this guy was coughing up a storm. So we went and checked with the owner if he was okay. Don't worry guys, she said, he's just a little horse. You would be very hard-pressed to find anyone who would tell you that they don't like these cars. There are an awful lot of awards sitting here in front of you, and there's a very good reason for that. The only criticism everybody always has for Volvo is, yeah, it's great, but can you justify the cost? Because all of this certainly isn't cheap. Well, I have really surprised myself on this trip. I will admit, before coming here, I expected it to be a runaway for me with the XC60. Why? Well, because it represents for me the perfect between compromising on space and power and luxury. We certainly did have a very nice model to test, and the hybrid engine is fabulous. Obviously, if you need to transport 7 people around, it's a no-brainer. You're going to go with the 90. If you don't have to have that challenge and you want the most nimble, athletic drive, then the 60. But for me, the runaway success of the troop is the 40. Why? Well, because I am more than happy with the result of the car as it's designed. Yes, when you sit in the cockpit, you think, oh, they've saved quite a bit of money here, but that is the only place that money has been saved. The ride is absolutely fantastic. If you can learn to live with a manual gearbox, and let's be honest, I think most of us can, and if it's as well executed as it is here, look at what you're getting for your money. It is such good value in terms of a Volvo SUV. I can't quite believe how much of the driving experience they've managed to cram into such a small body and without compromising at all in terms of your enjoyment as a driver. So that's 2 thumbs up from me on the XC40. I love the other 2, but I think at heart, what I really want most when I'm driving a car is fun. And I'm gonna need to have really rather a lot of fun once we start getting up into the 100,000 bracket. This car is only half that much money, and really for me it delivers at least as much fun. Yeah, I can't fit 7 people in here, but you know what? I'm going to be too busy laughing about the amount of money that I saved when buying it. I don't know that I'm going to be all that bothered. Well, that's about it from us. I hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as Thomas and I have enjoyed making it. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you would like more in-depth on these cars, then please check out Thomas's full reviews. We will link to those beneath in the comments. Please subscribe, and we hope we'll see you again soon.